She lit up every screen she touched, yet died alone, gasping for breath, with studio execs rewriting the cause. Hollywood sold dreams wrapped in smoke, but behind the glamour, a deadly secret spread. So why did they keep it quiet for decades? Walt Disney was the architect of childhood wonder, yet his final days were anything but magical. A lifelong smoker who reportedly went through up to 3 packs a day, Disney's habit was carefully hidden from the public. Despite creating a world full of color, life, and imagination, he quietly battled lung cancer in the shadows. His diagnosis came in 1966, just weeks before his death. The news stunned the world, not just because of his passing, but because almost no one knew he was sick. Even after his death, the official narrative stayed vague, with the Disney brand doing everything it could to preserve the myth of eternal vitality. No frailty, no flaws, just fantasy. But behind the curtain, the man who brought joy to millions was another casualty of an era soaked in smoke and silence. And he was far from the only one, because then came Nat King Cole. Nat King Cole wasn't just a voice, he was the voice. Smooth, regal, and impossibly cool, he broke racial barriers while serenading the world with Unforgettable and Mona Lisa. But behind that velvet sound was a deadly belief that cigarettes gave his voice its unique tone. Encouraged by industry myths and relentless studio image control, Cole smoked heavily, often seen with a cigarette even while rehearsing. He died in 1965 at just 45, a shockingly young age for someone at the peak of cultural influence. Even in death, the narrative was sanitized. His funeral was elegant, his music celebrated, but few dared highlight how the very industry that uplifted him also normalized the habits that likely killed him. His story was supposed to be triumphant, but the truth, it was laced with nicotine, secrecy, and denial. And if that doesn't sting enough, wait until you hear what happened to John Wayne. John Wayne was the face of American grit, fearless, untouchable, and larger than life. But the man who played heroes on screen was waging a losing battle behind the scenes. A legendary chain smoker, Wayne reportedly consumed 6 packs a day. When rumors of illness began swirling in the early 60s, studios scrambled to protect his image. For years, he downplayed the reality, insisting he'd beaten cancer after losing a lung. The truth? It never really left. By the late 70s, it returned with a vengeance, spreading to his stomach. Yet the Hollywood machine kept the spotlight on his masculinity, never his mortality. Even his final interviews were shaped to protect the myth of the Duke. He died in 1979, and the world mourned a cowboy, but never confronted what truly killed him. And for actresses like Bette Davis, the cover-ups didn't just protect a brand, they erased a battle. Bette Davis was fierce, defiant, and utterly unforgettable, both on and off screen. But the Golden Age's most uncompromising actress faced a private war that Hollywood never wanted fans to see. Davis was a heavy smoker for most of her life, a habit glamorized in nearly every one of her iconic roles. Cigarettes weren't just a vice, they were part of the image studios sculpted around her. By the 1980s, after multiple strokes and a mastectomy, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But it was the lung complications from decades of smoking that made her decline brutally slow. Despite visibly deteriorating health, Davis continued to appear in interviews and events, often masked by wigs, makeup, and lighting tricks to maintain the illusion of strength. Behind the scenes, she was struggling to breathe. But the studios weren't about to let the public see their legend fade. Not yet. And then came Dean Martin. Dean Martin was the epitome of cool. A velvet voice, a drink in hand, and a cigarette never far from his fingers. As a member of the Rat Pack, Martin helped define an era where charm, masculinity, and excess were worshipped. But behind the tuxedos and nightclub laughter was a man slowly unraveling. Martin smoked heavily for decades, often lighting one cigarette with the end of another. When lung cancer finally took hold in the early 90s, the decline was swift and largely hidden. Friends said he stopped fighting, retreating from the spotlight, refusing surgery, and choosing to die quietly in his Beverly Hills home on Christmas Day, 1995. The media eulogized his music and charisma, but rarely mentioned what had taken him. It didn't fit the image. Just like many before him, Martin's death was more than a tragedy. It was the price of a persona. So was Gypsy Rose Lee's. Gypsy Rose Lee was more than a burlesque star. She was a cultural force, blending elegance, wit, and rebellion into every performance. But beneath the rhinestones and smirks was a woman ensnared in the same toxic glamour that gripped all of Hollywood. A lifelong smoker, Lee's cigarettes became part of her persona. Flirtatious, defiant, and undeniably chic. As her fame soared, so did her reliance on the very habit that would destroy her lungs. Diagnosed with lung cancer in her late 50s, she passed away quietly in 1970, far from the footlights and stage she once commanded. The press noted her legacy, but not the illness that cut it short. There was no grand tribute, no studio accountability, just a quick fade to black. For someone who redefined what it meant to perform with power, her exit felt eerily muted. And next was someone whose image had to stay clean, Desi Arnaz. Desi Arnaz was a television trailblazer, the fiery Cuban bandleader who revolutionized the sitcom world with I Love Lucy. On screen, he was magnetic. Off screen, he was a visionary, building the empire that would change entertainment forever. But behind the charisma was a man drowning in smoke. Arnaz was a heavy smoker for most of his life, rarely seen without a cigarette, even on set. As health issues mounted, the industry kept quiet. After all, Desilu Productions still symbolized wholesome family fun. When lung cancer took hold, Arnaz deteriorated rapidly. He died in 1986 at just 69. His funeral was quiet, his illness largely glossed over in public obituaries. There was no reckoning, no spotlight on the smoking culture that engulfed him. It was more comfortable to remember him laughing beside Lucille Ball, but Hollywood's silence was deafening. Buster Keaton built his legend without saying a word. A silent film genius whose deadpan expressions and daring stunts redefined comedy. But off-screen, his life was filled with noise. Personal struggles, alcoholism, and a cigarette habit that followed him from vaudeville stages to Hollywood sets. By the time he was diagnosed with lung cancer in the mid-1960s, Keaton had already endured a turbulent comeback. Fans were just beginning to rediscover his brilliance when illness struck. Yet even then, few knew he was sick. The studios preferred to frame his final years as a quiet revival, not a race against time. He died in 1966, just as his contributions were finally being fully appreciated. The cause of death? Lung cancer. Barely mentioned in press releases. His legacy was comedy, not cancer. And like so many others, he passed before the industry ever reckoned with its deadly glamour. One more name? Jason Robards. Jason Robards was the kind of actor who didn't just play roles. He embodied them. Gritty, commanding, and emotionally raw, he lit up stage and screen with a presence few could match. But behind the accolades, including 2 Oscars and a Tony, was a lifelong smoker whose habit became his quiet undoing. Robards was rarely seen without a cigarette, both on set and off, often chain smoking between takes. By the time he was diagnosed with lung cancer in the late 90s, the damage was done. He died in 2000 at the age of 78. Tributes hailed his artistry and gravitas, but most avoided the uncomfortable truth. Smoking had stolen one of Hollywood's finest. There were no major campaigns, no public warnings, just praise wrapped in silence. And just like the stars before him, Robards' death became another quiet entry in a long list of losses. That list would also include George Peppard. George Peppard had the kind of charisma that couldn't be taught. Smooth, sharp, and effortlessly commanding. Best known as the dashing Paul Varjak in Breakfast at Tiffany's, and later as the cigar-chomping Hannibal in the A-Team, Peppard was the picture of masculine cool. But behind that image was a man battling addiction to the very props that defined his characters. A heavy smoker for most of his life, Peppard's lung cancer diagnosis came in the early 90s. He underwent surgery to remove part of a lung, but the damage was irreversible. He passed away in 1994 at the age of 65, younger than most expected, and far quieter than the headlines his career once earned. The media eulogized his charm and versatility, but few explored the root of his decline. Once again, Hollywood mourned the man, while avoiding the truth behind the mask. And this wasn't just coincidence. It was a pattern. For you, the viewer, please comment some love or hate, whatever you thought of this video. I want to give you guys good quality. The little button with the thumbs up and that fancy subscribe button. Yeah, hit that as well, hey.